There's no telling how far or how deep it might go. They better head back to the entrance before they get lost. The two turn around to start heading back towards the entrance. But wait, what was that? They spin around. It sounded like there was a noise behind them. But there's nothing there, just the empty passageway. They must be hearing things. They really should get out of here quickly, though. Come on, let's go. As they turn to leave, though, something happens. With a sickening squishing sound, the walls of the tunnel constrict, closing up between them. He runs towards the now closed passage and starts slapping at the moist, soft wall, but there's no response. But then he does hear something. Was that a scream? He's realized something else, too. Even though his friend had the flashlight, he can still see. While faint, the walls themselves seem to be producing a small amount of light. He yells out that he's going to get help and that his friend should hold tight and not move. He'll get him out of there. He has no idea if he can hear him, though. He starts to slowly make his way back the way he thinks they came, but the cave feels different. He's taking turns that he doesn't remember making on their short trip. He should be at the entrance already, and there seem to be more branching paths than there were before. It's hard to tell in the low light, though. Maybe he's just confused. He's hearing noises, too. Wet, writhing sounds. He's got to get out of here. The quarry worker reaches a fork in the tunnel and has no idea which is the right way to go. He doesn't remember this at all. He calls down the tunnel, but there's no answer to his cries. He hears more of those wet, slapping sounds behind him, though. He's got to keep moving. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, the left tunnel it is. He goes down his chosen path, rounds a corner, and sees another fork. What is going on here? He's got to pick, though. Eeny, meeny, miny. He screams as something leaps out of the tunnel at him. Outside the cave, the quarry worker is growing nervous. He's gotten a flashlight of his own and shines it down the tunnel, but he can't see any more than they could before. He calls out, asking if they're all right, but he's met only with silence. He turns around behind him at the empty quarry. They're the only ones working on the site that day, and if they don't get back to work soon, there's going to be some angry questions about why they spent the day horsing around inside of a cave. As much as he hates the idea, he's got to go in there and get them out. He enters the cave and goes around the first bend. He too notices how oddly sticky and slimy every surface is, but he has to press on. Maybe they were hurt and needed his help. He rounds another bend and spots something, a pair of legs sticking out from around the next turn. His friend must really have been hurt. He runs towards his injured coworker and kneels down next to him. It looks like he's passed out on the ground, and he tries to shake him awake. "Are you okay? What happened?" His friend moans a bit, but doesn't even open his eyes. He moans again, and this time blood starts pouring out of his mouth. The quarry worker steps back, scared at the sight of his friend's state. That's when he notices something. His friend's stomach. It's moving. He leans in close. He can see bumps swelling and moving around his abdomen. Is that? The SCP Foundation soon learned of the troubling reports and moved quickly to purchase the quarry and the surrounding lands. Those who had seen or heard rumors about the missing workers were amnesticized, and all further access to the area around the quarry was strictly controlled. The cave itself that had been unearthed was designated SCP-2385, but the Foundation needed to learn just what they were dealing with. So after a research outpost was constructed over the entrance, the investigation into what was happening inside this strange anomalous cavern system could finally begin. The first to enter the cave is D-11424, a Class D personnel, who is equipped with a shoulder-mounted camera, a Ruger LC-9 pistol, a machete, and 1 week's worth of rations, since it was unknown just how vast this cave system may be. D-11424 proceeds into the cave and immediately reports back the same conditions that the workers had experienced, that the surfaces of the cave were soft, wet, and a little sticky, and also that they seemed to have an almost imperceptible glow. D-11424 moves deeper into the cave, but sees no sign of the missing workers, despite one of their bodies having been reported as being lost relatively close to the entrance. He's ordered to continue deeper into the cave, and radios back that the walls weren't stable. He would pass by openings in the walls that would seal off once he was past. On more than one occasion, he saw new passages open up as well, and these didn't appear to be caused by collapses or other geological activity. The walls seemed like they were alive. But the walls were the only sign of life he could find. There was still no evidence of the missing workers or whatever might have gotten them. But then, after D11424 rounds a corner, he sees that something is up ahead of him. It's not one of the workers. It's a creature, and one that looks like nothing he has ever seen before. The thing crawling on the floor of the cave looks like a giant worm, several feet in length, but with a grotesque, skinless human head. D11424, frightened at the sight of this grotesque creature, turns to run, but it's too late. The worm has spotted him and charges at him immediately, slithering across the wet cave floor at an incredible speed. D11424 slips and falls to the ground, his shoulder-mounted camera knocked off his body and left facing a wall, leaving the researchers monitoring the feed with nothing except the sound of his screams. Once contact was lost with the Class D personnel, the Foundation decided that due to the presence of hostile creatures within the cave system, that the next exploratory expedition would be undertaken without humans. The mission was authorized, and 2 months later, a remote-controlled drone designated A47 was sent into the cave. Just like D11424 and the quarry workers before saw, its camera captures passageways opening and closing in the living rock walls. As it progresses deeper, it eventually spots the same worm-like creatures with horrible human faces that look like they've had their skin removed, which have now been designated by the Foundation as SCP-2385-1 entities. And A47 soon discovers a surprising fact about these bizarre organisms. They appear that they are being birthed right from the walls of the cave itself. As A47 enters one of those largest rooms yet seen in the cave, its camera captures over a dozen 2385-1s growing out of the walls and ceiling in various stages of maturity. Some of them snap at A47 as it passes by, trying to attack the drone, but luckily they're unable to reach. There's larger examples of the worms in the room too, and these ones also differ in appearance slightly, with a fibrous growth over their eyes. The researchers assume that these entities are different enough from the smaller versions that they warrant their own classification, and are designated as SCP-2385-2 entities. Luckily for A47, these larger specimens, which can be as large as 4 meters in length, seem much more docile than their smaller counterparts and ignore A47 as it passes by. A47 then learns another shocking piece of information about these disturbing worm-like creatures. They're cannibalistic. Its camera relays footage back to the research team of a 2385-1 entity feeding on another, smaller one. It appears that they eat their prey whole after unhinging their grotesque jaws. The one feeding tries to lash out at A47 with its tail, but can't reach him with half of another instance in its mouth, and the drone continues deeper into the cave. Just when A47 enters the next chamber, a 2385-1 instance growing out of the ceiling drops down right in front of it, leaving no way for the drone to get around it in the narrow section of cave. A47 quickly turns around to seek out another path, but its camera captures the passage closing in front of it. A47 is trapped. The 2385-1 entity charges towards the remote-controlled drone and attacks, biting and slapping it with its powerful tail. It then attempts to consume it, but is unable to ingest the bulky drone and, instead, leaves the heavily damaged robot for dead, slithering away deeper into the cave. The battered drone lies immobile on the cave floor for several hours, its camera broadcasting until the last of its battery is finally about to run out. Just before it stops sending signals back to the research outpost, though, it captures something. The wall next to A47 opens up, and 2 of the larger SCP-2385-2 entities emerge from the new passageway. One of them approaches A47, as the other probes at the wall next to it with its head. It seems as though the larger of the entities are actually able to form new pathways in the cave, or at least open up doorways between existing ones. With the last of its battery power, A47 sends back a truly remarkable sight. Out of the hole opened by the 2385-2 entity appears D11424. He's dirty, disheveled, sporting a month's worth of beard growth, and brandishing a machete. The wall opens up from the -2 entity prodding at it, and the odd group exits through it. It's the last thing A47 transmits back to the Foundation. 2 months later, after several more failed manned missions, there was finally a success. An SCP-2385-2 instance that had wandered close to the entrance was retrieved from the cave system and brought back to a Foundation research site where a camera was surgically implanted in its head. The entity, which was designated as Subject Alpha, or SA, was then amnestetized and released back into the 2385 caves, allowing researchers to monitor how it behaved as it traveled through its home environment. The researchers watched as SA made its way through the cave system and stopped in another of the rooms filled with young versions of 2385-1. The larger entity approached several and appeared to nuzzle its face against theirs before moving on, which looked to have a calming effect on the extremely aggressive smaller versions. As it continues through the tunnels, SA sees a group of 2385-1 instances feeding on a deceased 2385-2. It appears that when 2385-1s are unable to swallow their prey whole, they burrow into the body and consume them from the inside out. Luckily, they are too distracted by their meal to pay any attention to SA, and it is able to pass by. SA then runs into two other 2385-2 entities, and the three begin traveling through the caves together. They are soon attacked by a smaller -1, but the group is able to pin the biting and thrashing entity to the ground with their powerful tails, allowing SA to nuzzle it. Just like with the ones being birthed from the wall, this seems to calm the creature, but there is another effect as well. As the 2385-1 entity becomes more docile, the same fibrous growths that can be seen on the larger 2385-2 entities start to grow over its eyes. Is this how 2385-2s are created? The group of -2s continues their journey through the tunnels, often stopping to prod at the walls to open new pathways. It appears that they are searching for something, looking around each new room they enter before moving on. Eventually, they run into something, but it doesn't appear to be what they wanted to find. They enter a new section of cave, and blocking the path in front of them is the largest SCP-2385-1 entity yet recorded. It's as big as the -2s at over 7 meters in length and weighing an estimated 400 kilograms. It appears to be extremely hostile, but the -2s seem to instinctively know that the only way forward is to go past this massive -1. The trio nuzzles their heads together as if they are saying one final goodbye before one of the -2s charges straight ahead. The -1 attacks and quickly incapacitates it with its powerful tail and snapping jaws. It begins feeding on the -2, giving SA and its one remaining companion the time they need to get past. As the now duo moves past, the other is attacked from a side tunnel by a group of regular-sized but ferocious -1s. SA can't do anything to help. It seems to pick up the pace and continues on, but as it rounds a corner, it comes face-to-face with another large -1 instance. It turns down a side tunnel to avoid it, but finds itself in a dead end. It prods at the wall as the -1 rushes towards it, but no new passageways open. It turns around, seemingly resigned to its fate as the -1 begins attacking. But just then, something else appears in the tunnel coming towards them. It's D11424, charging forward with his machete raised in the air, his hair and beard both long and wild. He begins fighting the large -1 entity, hacking at it with his machete until it finally dies. With the vicious entity now dead, he kneels down next to SA and begins stroking its head in a calming manner. "Hey there, little guy. You all right?" he asks as he pets the 2385-2. "Yeah, you're fine. Get up. I know where it is. Come with me." SA struggles from its injuries, but is able to follow D11424 as he leads it through the tunnels, with D11424 stopping at one point to carve a piece off of the fleshy walls and consume it. The tunnels eventually open up into a large room that looks similar to the rest of the cave system, except there is a huge glowing orb at its center. It's a beautiful sphere of warm light that appears to be at least 10 meters in diameter. "Here we are," the D-Class tells SA, and motions towards the orb. "It's all right." SA nuzzles against D11424, perhaps one final thank you for saving its life, then instinctually seems to know what to do. The camera feed shows that it began crawling towards the sphere, and after a brief pause, started pushing itself inside. The camera recorded the brilliant light of the orb engulfing SA and its implanted camera before the feed finally cut out. The SCP Foundation would later discover that on that very same day, in the city of Elgin, Illinois, a local woman was admitted to the hospital after complaining of abdominal pains. Doctors performed emergency surgery and found something they did not expect. A micro camera had somehow become embedded inside of her body, which upon later investigations would be found to bear the same serial number as the one that had been implanted in SA. Following this strange event, SCP-2385, which had previously been classified as Euclid, was upgraded to Keter. An observation site has been built at the quarry and no further human expeditions are allowed inside. In a bit of good news, sometime later, D11424 finally emerged from the cave system. He was taken back into SCP Foundation custody and continues engaging in exploratory missions on behalf of the Foundation to this day. Now go and watch SCP-002, The Living Room, to find out about another bizarre location that may just be more than meets the eye. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single anomaly as we delve further and further into the SCP Foundation's classified archives. A man wakes up with a start. Did something just bite him? He looks down at his hand. Something definitely bit him. He can see the red welt already forming. He looks around for the culprit, but can't find it anywhere. He really hopes he doesn't have bed bugs. That's the last thing he needs right now. He'll have to keep his eyes open for potential pests. He doesn't want this to happen again, since the spot is already starting to itch and feel uncomfortable. A couple days pass, though, with no signs of other bugs. It must have just been a random insect that came inside his house to escape the winter cold. The spot on his hand felt a little rough for a day or two, but now he's pretty much forgotten all about it. Now what he really needs is some coffee before sitting down to another coding session. The man is in his kitchen trying to make a fresh pot of coffee, but finds he's having a hard time. He's not so much making coffee as he is making a mess. He knocks his favorite mug onto the ground, breaking it, and decides that maybe he doesn't need coffee after all. A couple of nights later, as the man is watching TV, he starts to cough. Just a little at first, but then more and more. The coughing fits get longer and deeper too, like they are coming from the very bottom of his lungs. He hopes he isn't coming down with something. He hasn't left the house in days, so how could he have? Can bugs transfer colds? He'll have to look it up later. For now, he needs to do something about this cough. He won't be able to sleep if it keeps up. He needs to go get some medicine. The man gets bundled up and heads out. It's lightly snowing as he walks to the pharmacy, and he can't help but admire the way the moon hangs in the sky, a beautiful beacon of light on this dark winter evening. Inside the pharmacy, he finds the cold medicine section and picks out a cough suppressant. He takes it to the counter and decides to get a few candy bars, too. He's developed a real sweet tooth these last few days. The man starts to cough again. It's a good thing he's getting this medicine. Several more days pass, and the man isn't feeling any better. This cough just won't go away. He decides it's finally time to go see a doctor. As he sits in the doctor's office waiting room, he does his best to hold in his coughs, but he has a very hard time. The woman on the other side of the room is coughing too. Strangely, it actually makes him feel a little better. There must just be something going around. A nurse comes into the waiting room and calls his name. The doctor is ready for him. The man is sitting on the bed in the examination room when the doctor enters. He's looking over his medical records and doesn't even look up from his clipboard. He tells the man to take off his shirt so that he can be examined, and the man obliges. "Okay, let's see what the trouble is," the doctor says. He finally looks up at the man and screams. It didn't take long for the SCP Foundation to hear the reports of people's limbs metamorphosing into insectoid appendages, and they knew immediately what they were dealing with. This was another outbreak of the parasitic, limb-transforming insect known as SCP-150. SCP-150 is an obligate parasite, meaning that it requires a host for the completion of its reproductive life cycle. It bears a visual appearance similar to that of Cymothua exigua, another parasite that eats the tongue of a particular type of fish before replacing the tongue with its own body. SCP-150 engages in similar behavior, though it appears to exclusively affect humans. When a human comes in contact with the small bug-like organism, it will embed itself under its new host's skin. Next, over the course of roughly 7 days, SCP-150 will burrow deep into the host's flesh and begin to cause numerous physiological changes to them. First, and most prominently, SCP-150 will begin a gradual process of altering the limb that is nearest to the original infection site. As SCP-150 burrows deeper and consumes the flesh, it excretes a substance that has the effect of replacing the missing sections of the limb with a hard, chitinous material that resembles one of its own appendages. Beneath the chitin, the excreted substance forms a rudimentary nervous system that gives the host the ability to control the new limb as if it were their own. As it feeds, SCP-150 also secretes several chemicals that contain anesthetic, immunosuppressant, and transplant-rejecting properties that keep the host's body from responding to the changes, or even reacting at all. In fact, the host will often report that their new limb is completely normal and feels stronger and more resilient after the transformation. SCP-150 will continue to feed for approximately 1 to 2 weeks, and as it feeds on the nutrients within its host's body, it will begin to reproduce, creating eggs that it deposits directly into the bloodstream. While the majority of these eggs will die off, enough usually survive to begin colonizing other parts of the host's body, where they will hatch and repeat the process of feeding, reproducing, and spreading more eggs. It is theorized that it is capable of reproducing on its own, meaning that a single instance of SCP-150 is all it takes to create a new colony. Humans infected with SCP-150 will sometimes report slight discomfort and issues with their fine motor skills during this period, but will usually not express any knowledge of what might be causing this. Eventually, SCP-150 eggs will reach the host's lungs, where the process of assimilating continues, this time replacing the lungs themselves. During this process, more eggs will be produced, laid, and then spread out of the body by the host's coughing. As many as 10,000 eggs will be produced during this period, approximately 1% of which will survive being expelled, find another host, and implant themselves. The assimilation process then spreads to the central nervous system, including the spinal cord and brain, but strangely, the host will show no signs that their consciousness or behavior have been affected in any way. In interviews with hosts of SCP-150, those who are unaware that they are infected have not expressed any knowledge of changes happening in or out of their body. When subjects are made aware that they have been infected, they will be able to point out the site of the original infection and agree that a change has taken place, but they seem to have no ill will towards their new chitinous appendages and will often express positive feelings about it. In order to better study the effects of SCP-150 under SCP Foundation control, 2 D-Class personnel, D-13732 and D-016002, were both infected with the parasites, and the assimilation process was allowed to fully progress through all the stages. Following signs that D-016002 was experiencing swelling of the brain, a decompressive craniotomy was performed, a procedure in which a portion of the skull is removed in order to relieve pressure on the brain. This surgery had the added benefit of giving Foundation researchers the chance to look at SCP-150's progress firsthand. But after a flap of her skull was removed, the attending scientists did not find that her brain was swelling. They didn't find her brain at all, but instead observed numerous instances of SCP-150 in the cavity where her brain should be. The D-Class had been partially anesthetized to numb her skull but remained conscious during the procedure, and the scientists asked her several simple questions to which she was perfectly able to answer. They began removing some of the parasites, and as they did so, her answers became slower and less clear. It appeared that the SCP-150 instances had not just eaten and replaced her brain, they had become her brain. For the next experiment, they would use the instances of SCP-150 that had been removed from D-13732's nervous system after he had been euthanized following the discovery that his entire nervous system had also been replaced entirely by SCP-150. The parasites taken from his brain cavity were placed into D-016002's, and the results were nothing short of incredible. After observing a period of time where the organisms appeared to move and rearrange themselves within her skull, she regained consciousness. Once awake, not only did her cognitive functions immediately improve, when she was asked to state her name, she told them it was Michael, D-13732's name. It is unknown why SCP-150 engages in this peculiar life cycle, but the danger it poses to humans and the difficulty in keeping it contained has led the SCP Foundation to classify it as Keter. Some of the more erudite researchers have taken to calling the parasite the Ship of Theseus, a play on the philosophical notion that questions whether something that has had all of its parts replaced is still fundamentally the same, or if it has become something new. Perhaps the observation of those infected with SCP-150 can shed some light on this millennia-old question. Infected patients who are being studied are to be kept in Level 3 biohazard containment cells, with never more than 1 infected host per cell. Cultures of SCP-150 adults and eggs are kept in vacuum-sealed glass flasks in the Site-42 Infectious Materials Lab, and the Foundation's standard pathogen handling procedures are required to be followed at all times. Should any instance of SCP-150 be found outside of containment, it is to be immediately incinerated. Now go and watch another entry from the files of Dr. Bob, and be sure to subscribe as we delve further and further into the SCP Foundation's classified archives. You'll be starting out with cold cases, the police chief tells the detective who has just arrived for his first day at the precinct. We've got more than enough to keep you busy, so head on down to the archives and get started. The new detective is looking forward to taking on these unsolved crimes. Cracking the overlooked and long-since forgotten cases is one of his specialties, and it brings him great joy to solve the puzzles that no one else has been able to. The detective heads to a part of the police station that doesn't look like it sees much foot traffic, where he finds the door labeled Archives. Inside the room, the air is musty, and when the detective sets down his bag on a table, a thick cloud of dust is ejected and makes him sneeze. He takes out the list of cases he's supposed to be working on and goes to a shelf containing rows and rows of evidence boxes. He pulls one down and starts looking through the files inside. It's full of police reports, witness statements, crime scene photos, and even bits of evidence. Hours pass as the detective goes down his list, looking through box after box, report after report. He finds that it's best to take a cursory survey first and see if anything leaps out at him, before drilling down to start combing through the details. As he pulls down the last box from his list of cases that the chief told him to work on, he notices something. High up on a shelf, nestled among the many identical cardboard boxes, is what looks to be a piece of leather luggage. He can't help but wonder what this is doing here in the archives. Is it a piece of evidence from another case that got left here for some reason? Or did someone simply forget their bag after they finished looking through old files? Whatever the reason it's here, he has a job to do, and investigating this bag isn't on his list. But then again, he knows he won't be able to focus until he knows what this bag is and what's inside. He'll let himself take just a quick peek, then it's back to work. The detective returns to the shelf with the bag. It looks like it's been here for a long time. There's a layer of dust covering it that's as thick as anything else in the room. He takes it down and blows the dust off the bag. He unlatches it, and inside he finds